and we have to really escalate the noise we make so that we'll be heard.
Welcome to Gay USA. I'm Andy Hum.
I'm Ann Northrup.
And we start off in the news this week with a horrible story from Brazil where the lesbian political leader, Marielle Franco, was assassinated. And it was followed by a massive demonstration of outrage and grief.
Terrible story. The main architect of the Trump campaign hack of Facebook, this whole Cambridge Analytica thing, is a now repentant young gay man.
Why did you do it? Cynthia Nixon has launched her challenge to Andrew Cuomo to be the governor of New York in a Democratic primary this year.
Lots to talk about there, and we'll show you her opening campaign video. Meanwhile, Irish Prime Minister, actually, I saw someone complain about him being called the Prime Minister instead of the...
Taoiseach?
Yes.
Well, he's the Taoiseach, that's his title, but that's what it means.
Leo Varadker met with Vice President Pence, marched in the St. Patrick's Day parade in New York with his boyfriend.
There's a new best-selling book about a gay bunny living at the mansion of Vice President Pence.
And there is an angle from The View on this story. I'm mad at them again about this. Kate Kendall is stepping down at the end of the year after more than 20 years at the helm of the National Center for Lesbian Rights.
And we thank you for your service.
We sure do.
A state of Maine legislator who trashed the student activist Emma Gonzalez for being LGBT first got a Democratic opponent and then dropped out of the race entirely himself.
Thank heavens. And the March for Our Lives, initiated by the Parkland students, is this Saturday everywhere across the country.
I'll be there. And finally, the Will and Grace show perverted the debate over bakeries and the First Amendment for laughs.
It's so shameful. We're so angry about this, and we will explain in great detail when we get to entertainment news, because that's what they think it is.
But we do start in Brazil. Lesbian activist and city council member in Rio de Janeiro, Marielle Franco, 38 years old, was assassinated in a hail of bullets after she left a speaking engagement, obviously by some level of political opponents. She is someone from the poorer areas of Rio, came out of this, champion of this, was raising all these totally left progressive issues, totally challenging the power structure. And, you know, this comes at a time when the right-wing president, what's his name, Michael Temer, T-E-M-E-R, has ordered the military to occupy the streets. And it's, so they had this,
yeah.
that we show.
Well, she let's, another minute on her. She was a great champion of the people and a great foe of the ruling party. This was the cops assassinating her.
Yes.
This was
Look at the number of people. There are tens of thousands of people in the streets over her assassination.
Yes, that is a protest following her assassination.
Harvey Milk, after Harvey Milk.
Yes, very much so. And she was a similar figure in her charismatic leadership. She was an extremely important figure, and this news has gone around the world and really rocked people.
Well, follow the money. I mean, she had denounced the military occupation, which was being instituted by the right-wing government, and get ready for it here, you know, if that's what Trump wants to do. He's starting with that military parade, but he's serious. But she led killed investigating fiscal abuses. That's why I think she probably was killed.
She was also a great campaigner against police brutality. So all of this played in to make her a very prominent foe of the ruling party and the ruling government. And they just, you know, it's Putin style. They just eliminated her. Right. They assassinated her. She was in a car. Another car comes up beside her, hail of bullets, and boom, she's dead.
She is survived by her 19-year-old daughter, Luyara Santos, and hundreds of thousands of followers.
And her female partner.
Yes.
All right, so that is terrible news from Brazil. Let's go back to terrible news from the United States, of which there is no lack. The main important story this week has been in Trump land, this whole revelation of the work of Cambridge Analytica,
yes,
hacking the tens of millions of Facebook users and their data to try to create profiles of how to affect the election by appealing to people in certain ways in certain places. And it turns out that one of the main people who created this algorithm, I guess, for mining the data and using it was a young gay man, Christopher Wiley.
28 years old.
Now spilling the beans and filling us in on what actually happened.
Christopher says, I was naive, but he was very good at what he did, and he was the chief data analyst there. And Rebecca Mercer, the right-wing woman who funded all this, told him, we need more of your type, the gays. I love the gays, she said. She's a complete right-wing nut who works against LGBT rights and everything else. And his boss was Steve Bannon, who felt the same way. They saw us gays as early adopters, and they wanted people like us.
Well, they turned down some evangelical types who went to them and said, can you pick out the homos from this 50 million so that we can target them with conversion therapy pitches?
I didn't see that.
At least we dodged that bullet.
I'm glad I watched this show. Wow.
But yes, we are everywhere. And at least thank you, Christopher, for coming clean on this and telling us all about it, because this is dastardly stuff.
If there are any others of you out there who would like to repent, just go to our website and contact us, and we'll arrange it.
He's Canadian, by the way.
Yes, gay Canadian.
All right, a few more Trump sins this week. Ben Carson was testifying to Congress and asked about taking down rules about how to treat transgender people in homeless shelters. And he said, well, it's so complicated and people are worried about sharing bathrooms. So we just removed all those guidelines and we're not going to deal with it.
Right. And Betsy DeVos, now try to follow this, she won't change the change in the trans policy that has been affected until Congress clarifies Title IX. Well, the courts are clarifying Title IX for you. How about reading the papers?
And there's nothing in the law that says you can't protect LGBT people just because there isn't a federal law that says so. But she's testifying to Congress, and this Congresswoman from Maine, Representative Clark, goes after her and says, are you going to enforce these civil rights law? Are you going to protect people? And Betsy DeVos sits there and says, well, of course, for federal money must follow federal law. Now, we know, because we follow this stuff, that that's code for there's no federal law protecting LGBT people, so I don't have to.
Except on hate crimes.
So I don't have to enforce non-discrimination rules protecting sexual orientation and gender identity before I give federal money to schools that overtly discriminate against
Which is the same position Jeff Sessions takes, but they're not acknowledging all the court decisions that do say this is covered under federal law.
But the Congresswoman and members of Congress also do not understand this formula.
Oh, so, do not understand it, or just...
no, this is a liberal Democratic Congresswoman from Maine.
Okay.
Yeah, who's going after and saying, how dare you give federal money to this, I think, Catholic school that discriminates against LGBT people. If you're using federal funds, you must follow non-discrimination rules. And Betsy DeVos says, oh, yes, we follow all federal civil rights rules, absolutely. And the congressman says, well, thank you.
Well,
thank you. You're not. They don't include us. They're not using them.
Betsy, we're just going to have to sue you. And your brother Eric, it's her brother, right? Eric Prince.
Oh yes.
He's not looking too good either these days in the Mueller investigation.
Oh, my God.
If there still is one by the time you're watching this.
By the way, Chris Hayes on MSNBC was showing that tape of Representative Clark and DeVos and praising Representative Clark for really nailing Betsy DeVos.
Oh, God.
No.
All right. One of your U.S. delegates to the UN Commission on the Status of Women includes the viciously anti-trans activist Bethany Cosma, who calls kids gender-confused children if they're trans. And she also proclaimed that the United States is a pro-life nation.
Meanwhile, you know that Andrew McCabe got fired by Jeff Sessions on behalf of the president 24 hours before his pension kicked in. Well,
of his full pension.
Yes. Okay. And that may be appealable in some way. But meanwhile, the out gay congressman from Wisconsin, Mark Pocan, seriously or in jest, offered McCabe a job so that he could put in the time to get his full pension.
He only needed a day or two. Actually, a bunch of Congress members, but Mark was the first.
Now,
because gays are early adopters.
Moving on to another cabinet department, the Department of Health and Human Services. They have proposed delaying from 2019 to 2021 the mandated collection of data on LGBT adoptees. And they've also proposed eliminating transgender people from the data they collect about seniors. And they have stripped all mention of lesbian and bisexual women from their women's health website. They're just, snip here, here, here.
By the way, I neglected to mention in for the Trump legal team, we just heard that Mr. Dowd has resigned as we were going to tape, but this Joseph DeGenova, who's the Fox commentator hired, who's a conspiracy theorist. DeGenova. He's the one who says Trump is being framed by the FBI. He also represents Eric Prince, who we just referred to for being under investigation for colluding with the Russians in the Seychelles.
Let's move on to Mike Pence and Leo Varadker.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah,
and then we'll do Cynthia Nixon. But let's stick with the national politics
I do have some
first.
other Trump stuff, but okay.
Oh, okay.
By the way, since we are on the verge of this, if Trump does fire Mueller, there are demonstrations planned. And if it happens before 2 p.m., go to a demo at 5 p.m. in your city. And if it happens, if he fires them after 2 p.m., noon the following day. Like in New York, we're going to Times Square. So just be prepared for that. You can Google this. It's on the web. We have to be out on the streets.
Stay alert.
Yeah, I'll put the email, the website, in the email that we send out every week.
Or to try to preclude this, you could contact your member of Congress to say, it'd be nice if he passed that bill that protects Mueller from being fired rather than waiting until after he's fired to go demonstrate.
I kind of think the Democrats, if they take power back, are going to have to hire Mueller for one of the investigation committees because he's got so much good stuff.
They could hire him even if they're not running the committees, I think, or maybe not.
All right.
You got something before we move on to Pence?
Well, just to talk about what we're going through, because it is so serious. You even hear Barry McCaffrey saying,
the world is collapsing.
The country is being run by a traitor. By the way,
Fran Lebowitz says it's being run by a moron, which I've always thought.
Do you know that the United States is no longer the second most visited country in the world? It's now Spain because of Trump, because people don't want to come here. The most in the world that people want to go to? France, actually. Interesting. And the Holocaust proclamation this year. Remember how they got in trouble for not mentioning Jews last year?
Yeah.
So this year, they mentioned Jewish people, Slavs, Roma, gays, people with disabilities, priests, and religious leaders. And they said that there were fine people on both sides, but, that last part I
they looked it up in Wikipedia.
I made that last part, but they did actually mention gays this year.
All right. I
don't want to give them any credit. But,
yeah.
And then the trans-military thing. We didn't, that the U.S. district judge there is compelling Trump to reveal which generals did you talk to? She's getting very impatient with them. You've got to tell me. And they're saying executive privilege.
Well, the answer is none.
That's what she actually said. She wrote, the answer to these questions is none.
I should be a federal judge.
Peter Boykin, the gay Trump supporter who's running for the U.S. House from North Carolina versus Amos Quick, he opposes trans troops. He said a trans person might snap and turn it, a gun, on their fellow soldiers. We're done with you, Peter.
We are, Peter.
We know you watch, but that kind of...
We try to be even-handed, but you have now gone too far.
And the EEOC, which now has 1 Republican and 2 Democrats, because they haven't confirmed the new Republicans, filed an amicus brief backing a gay man in the 8th Circuit who was suing for discrimination. Because they can't get their people in place. We don't have ambassadors to, like, you know, I don't know, scores of countries.
Well,
who needs government?
The Irish Taoiseach, is that correct?
Taoiseach.
Came to the United States for St. Patrick's Day. I've always wondered why they came here. Why wouldn't they be more appropriate staying in their own country?
Because it's to... St. Patrick's parades are an American thing, basically.
Well, they have them in Ireland.
Now, but that's only because when people come over to Ireland, they sort of expect it, even though it's always just been a religious holiday over there.
So he came here, and first he was in Texas at South by Southwest, and he neglected to say anything to the homophobic governor of Texas, even though he, the Irish Taoiseach, is gay. Anything to Greg Abbott about his policies, but he said, I'll say something to Trump and Pence when I get to Washington.
So when he got to Washington, Pence closed the meeting. Now, we are told by Leo that he did bring up these issues, but he's keeping the conversation private. But we had a picture of him up there with his boyfriend, Dr. Matt Barrett, and they marched in the New York St. Patrick's Parade. They made a visit, or at least Leo made a visit to the Stone Wall, but it wasn't a big, and was picketed by ACT UP, who confronted him about the fact that you don't have PrEP in Ireland.
It was a very gentle confrontation. I saw the video of it. They asked, he answered, and it was all very friendly, and everyone went away fairly satisfied. Meanwhile, our Vice President, Mr. Pence, went to Savannah, Georgia, to participate in the St. Patrick's Day parade there. And he ran into a lot of us in Savannah. Did we?
Yeah, the gay activists there said we're appalled that he's being invited to participate in our parade. Yeah. So not only did they put up rainbow flags, but they ran along the side of the route the entire time shouting at him. There they all are, having a great time, sending the message home.
Yeah, that was great.
But we left out the headline. When Pence met with Varadkar from Ireland, he said, I'd like to meet your boyfriend.
Yes, bring him around to the Naval Observatory next time.
Make sure Mother is present. Well, should we go with the Naval Observatory? No, we do that later.
The bunny.
Well, it's a little out of order, but we can do it. The picture we have with John.
Yeah, it's right there.
All right. So, go ahead.
Well, that's out of order.
Mike Pence wrote a book. Mike Pence's wife wrote a book about
daughter.
His wife did the illustration, didn't she?
Yes, but the daughter wrote the book.
Wrote the book. Yeah.
With help from the bunny, of course. They have a rabbit, who they named Marlon Bundo, as in bunny instead of Brando. And there was a reason for that. Because it all started with sort of Godfather references of we're going to make you an offer you can't refuse. So they have this book coming out, like all these White House families put out books by their dogs and cats. Yeah. So Pence puts out a bunny book, Marlon Bundo. So John Oliver on his show last Sunday night said, all right, we've produced a book, but we've made the bunny gay. Marlon Bundo is gay. And
a very special boy bunny who falls in love with another boy bunny.
And after all, we have learned recently and have heard for years that Marlon Brando had affairs with men. So it all fits.
The Pence book includes a stop, some cross-country trip or something, at Focus on the Family in Colorado.
Yep.
Now, this other book was developed by the John Oliver staff. This woman, Jill Twiss, wrote it. And the proceeds are going to go to AIDS United and the Trevor Project. And the audio book was recorded by Jim Parsons, John Lithgow, RuPaul, Ellie Kemper, and Jesse Tyler Ferguson. And it's at the top of the bestseller list now.
It's #1 on Amazon. But here's my beef. So Pence's daughter goes on The View to promote her original Marlon Bundo book. Not one mention of the John Oliver version.
Oh, God.
Not What do you think of it? How do you like it? Now, she, meanwhile, in other interviews has taken the attitude of, oh, the more the merrier. We're all giving to good charities.
That's the way the Mormons
fun.
feel about the Book of Mormon.
But the View women could not even ask about the gay competing book.
Not even Joy?
None of them. And I suspect they got browbeaten behind the scenes by Meghan McCain, who said, don't you dare. I'm just guessing.
You got to deal with the elephant in the room, or the bunny, as the case may be.
They did not. Now, back to the New York St. Patrick's Day parade.
Yes.
The lavender and green LGBT contingent did march again. We have a couple of... there's Phil Donahue in the Notre Dame sweatshirt.
And Malachi McCourt, well, the last of the McCourt brothers in the foreground there. And at the left there is Judith Kaysen Windsor, who was one of the Grand Marshals, the widow of Edie Windsor. And, of course, Brendan Fay there in the middle, and Kathleen Walsh Darcy. They are the organizers of Lavender and Green. So, and they were very well... This time, they actually had people on the sidelines, because we used to be in the back. So I had to leave, go see Angels in America, which we'll tell you about next week. But they were apparently very well received.
I would think so. What you're saying is they were further up in the parade,
so there was a crowd
so
on the sidelines.
was still there.
That's right.
Yeah, I get it.
All right.
Okay.
No,
so let's go back to politics around the world. Oh, Cynthia Nixon. We have got to get to Cynthia Nixon. So she has declared for governor of New York, running against the incumbent, Andrew Cuomo.
Two-time incumbent.
Yes, so that's quite a challenge to take on the two-time incumbent.
He has $30 million in his war chest. I wonder who gave it to him.
Well, here's an interesting little statistic. When the latest poll, when people are asked, do you want to see Andrew Cuomo reelected, he wins by only 2 points, 48 to 46. He is not all that popular, except among the powers that be. So that indicates that he is gettable. But when you right this minute poll him against Cynthia Nixon, it comes out like 60-20.
Well, here's what happens. She is dismissed by many as, just what we need, another celebrity who has no experience to be governor. And I've heard this from even some friends of mine.
Me too.
And I'm like, first of all, she's one of the hardest working women I know. She's been acting since a child. She's a director. A hard worker, but she's also been involved in civic affairs and politics for decades.
Yes.
And so
comes from very humble beginnings, and is a native New Yorker.
And what she doesn't have, she's not beholden to the special interests at this point.
Not at all.
You know,
I mean, the Human Rights Campaign, I would say foolishly, endorsed Cuomo already. Now, that's, again, the arm twisting and the access kinds of issues. But what I really like about what she's doing is that she has gone out charging hard. She is very tough and is attacking him and attacking the issues right out of the gate.
Now, we give Andrew Cuomo credit for, he was a late adopter on same-sex marriage.
Very late.
Very late. But when in 2011, he knocked heads in the legislature and he got the marriage equality bill through. He did do that. And he's been good on gun control. And we can talk about some other issues.
And he finally stopped fracking.
But the issue that he's terrible about is he's not a leader of the Democratic Party in the state. We keep telling you, now it sounds crazy, you think New York is some liberal place, but we have a bunch of rogue Democrats who caucus with the Republicans to get extra money
for themselves
and keep the Republican minority in the Senate in power. We can't do good progressive things in this state because of that. And Andrew Cuomo refuses repeatedly to provide leadership so that we can have the state run by real Democrats.
And that's one of the things that Cynthia is attacking him on, is his craven cowardice about keeping the Republicans in power. Or not cowardice, he likes having the Republicans in power in the state Senate.
And then Christine Quinn, who was a losing candidate for mayor against de Blasio in the first time out, called her an unqualified lesbian who did not support her, a qualified lesbian for mayor, which I imagine she has some sense of pique about. But
you think?
But now Chris has had to apologize for this
repeatedly. Well, there are a couple of things going here. One,
Cynthia is bisexual.
Chris ran for mayor 5 years ago.
Yeah.
She thought she was going to sweep it, but Cynthia and others supported de Blasio, who came from behind and just
out of nowhere.
I would say slaughtered, but I don't want to use language like that. Beat Chris Quinn handily. So Chris Quinn is very angry that she did not win the mayoralty, and very angry specifically at Cynthia Nixon as a fellow lesbian for not supporting her. Meanwhile,
a sister lesbian, I would say. All right.
Thank you. Yes, but that's where this qualified versus unqualified lesbian comes from.
Yes.
And then Chris Quinn has gone on to be a close associate of Cuomo's. So, so they are. Chris Quinn and Cynthia become surrogates in the de Blasio-Cuomo fight, which is eternal. But Chris Quinn is not coming to this as a neutral observer. She's coming in as a surrogate for Cuomo.
And the rumor was that she was even being considered for lieutenant governor to run on a ticket with Andrew. He would dump his current woman, upstate woman, lieutenant governor.
Kathy Hochul.
Yeah, so it's a mess. But, you know, Chris did apologize for this.
Yes, she did.
And but they keep saying, everybody keeps saying, Cynthia is unqualified. Well, let me tell you what the qualifications are to be governor of New York. Live in the state for 5 years, be a U.S. citizen, and be 30 years old.
Well, here's the thing. Cynthia Nixon is a smart person. She's an ambitious person. She's an experienced politically person.
Yeah.
And to call her unqualified, I think, is ridiculous. And one thing
there's some people are even comparing her to Trump because she has no experience. You know, Andrew Cuomo has a famous name, too. His father was governor.
Yes. How do you think he got elected?
He did not get elected. The first office that he ran for was statewide elective office. He didn't run for city council or Congress or anything like that.
And I'm angry.
He was the HUD secretary under Bill Clinton. Yes.
Representative Sean Patrick Maloney, also on the Cuomo team, has been saying things like, this is a ridiculous waste of time for Cynthia Nixon to run. Now, Sean Patrick Maloney ran for Attorney General of New York when he had not the slightest chance in the world and hocked a lot of people for money in the LGBT community.
And it helped Andrew Cuomo get elected Attorney General because it split progressive vote.
So all this piling on that you see against Cynthia is coming from people with real other agendas, and I think we really need to give her a chance to develop her. Yeah.
Let's have her on.
Well, certainly.
She's been on before.
We've asked her, and we will repeat that request.
And I do remember we had her on about a show she was directing.
With Stacey Ann Chin.
And I just remember her, intensity.
Presence.
And when she
She's
was doing
a serious
that interview.
person.
Yes.
Well, let's take a look at her opening campaign video, which is the first step in establishing and defining herself in New York.
Smile to protest.
What was it?
Audibly.
Yeah.
New York is my home.
How you doing?
I've never lived anywhere else.
Yeah.
When I grew up here, it was just my mom and me in a one-bedroom, fifth-floor walk-up. New York is where I was raised and where I'm raising my kids. I'm a proud public school graduate and a prouder public school parent. I was given chances I just don't see from most of New York's kids today. Our leaders are letting us down. We are now the most unequal state in the entire country, with both incredible wealth and extreme poverty. Half the kids in our upstate cities live below the poverty line. How did we let this happen? I love New York. I've never wanted to live anywhere else, but something has to change. We want our government to work again on health care, ending mass incarceration, fixing our broken subway. We are sick of politicians who care more about headlines and power than they do about us.
It can't just be business as usual anymore. If we're going to get at the root problem of inequity, we have to turn the system upside down. We have to go out ourselves and seize it. This is a time to stick our necks out, to remember where we came from. This is a time to be visible. This is a time to fight.
I'm Cynthia Nixon. I'm a New Yorker. And together, we can win this fight.
Now she's on an Amtrak train at the end there, but they also show on the subways. And I remember somebody posted on the New York Times site, oh yeah, like she really rides the subways. She does. I see her there all the time. I don't even say hello, leave her alone. This is New York, but Cynthia Nixon rides the subways.
I think it takes incredible courage.
Absolutely, bravery.
For her to be taking on this race. She is going to get attacked so viciously by Cuomo.
Well, Cuomo was already saying, sort of trying to dismiss her as a second-rate actress. He didn't use those words, but he named some more prominent people who we might worry about if they ran. But it's ugly.
Now, his father, Mario Cuomo, ran for mayor against Ed Koch in New York City years ago, and the secret slogan that he plastered all over town while not taking credit for was, vote for Cuomo, not the homo.
They put it up on the roads in conservative neighborhoods.
Yeah.
And Koch, at least, who I didn't like Ed Koch, but Koch at least says, I knew Andrew did that. He knew I knew he did it. Andrew was never acknowledged.
No question. But the
but
twist,
Andrew was the campaign manager.
But the twist, yes, absolutely.
And I was, we wanted Mario for governor in when he ran against Koch, because Mario became more liberal, and Andrew was the one who kept holding up the gay ads, the gay content, taking positions on gay issues. It was Andrew. Now, and he knows I know that.
Anti-gay.
Anti-gay. Andrew was holding things up.
And so the twist this year is that the not official but amusing slogan is vote for the homo, not for Cuomo, which I think is good. But Cynthia showed up at the Stonewall Inn this week as part of her campaign kickoff. And you can see her speech online. Maybe we can provide a link to it.
We will. If you get on our email list, we will send you a link.
It's a little fuzzy, phone video, but she said something. She gave a terrific speech, and a lot of it was about LGBT stuff. But one line I thought was particularly great. She said, being queer and being visible has been one of the unexpected joys of my life. Mm-hmm. And I found that moving. Yes,
because she had lived with a man and had kids with him. Danny Moses, I think his name was.
Yep.
And, and then she met Christine Marinoni, and they did a lot of education stuff together, besides making a family. All right, also in New York, Earl Hall has been added to the National Register of Historic Places. This is at Columbia University because it was a venue for meetings and dances of the Student Homophile League pre-Stonewall 1967. I don't know how they got this through, but they did.
All right, I'm going to hopscotch some political stories from around the nation. In Indiana, we were worried about a proposed piece of legislation that would say no LGBT stuff in sex education or any discussion of sexuality. Activists in the ACLU managed to get that taken out of the legislation, although they did put in more abortion restrictions.
Should we celebrate the power couple marrying in New York?
Okay. Although I have a lot more political stories.
The president of the American Federation of Teachers, Randy Weingarten, and the rabbi at Congregation Beth Simchat Torah, Sharon Kleinbaum, are going to marry this weekend on March 25th. They've been together a long time.
Yes, they have. Also in New York, we lost Representative Louise Slaughter from Rochester at 88. She was a great ally to the LGBT community. She was one of the few brave enough to vote against the Defense of Marriage Act. She was against Don't Ask, Don't Tell. She was a supporter of the trans community and a member of the Equality Caucus in the House of Representatives.
Last week we told you about how there was a legislator in Maine who, Republican, who had called Emma Gonzalez, who was
Leslie Gibson.
Yes, his name is Leslie Gibson. Called Emma Gonzalez, who was a bisexual Parkland student activist, a skinhead lesbian. So David Hogg, her student colleague, tweeted to get someone to run against him, and a Democrat stepped forward. A woman named Erin Gilchrist, 28 years old. She stepped forward. I think, did we have maybe we don't have a picture of her. But then Gibson dropped out. There's still going to be a Republican, and I think it's a very Republican area, but wow.
Yeah. In Philadelphia, the city has stopped allowing Catholic and Christian foster care agencies to make placements because they refuse to work with LGBT parents. This is the way it's supposed to work. City and state and federal money should not be going to agencies that discriminate. There are plenty of other agencies that can work in foster and adoption care that work with everybody, and we should not be supporting the ones that discriminate. So thank you to Philadelphia.
They're taking you seriously in Provo, Utah. The county commission there is holding up $100,000 in funding for the annual America's Freedom Festival, which is held around 4th of July, over the 2017 exclusion of an LGBT youth group. The parade says, we don't want issues in the parade. So much for freedom. What are you celebrating?
Well, you'll be happier about Oregon, where Judge Vance Day has been suspended for 3 years without pay because he would not marry a same-sex couples, and he covered it up, and he lied about other cases too. Nice judge behavior. No. So he's out for a while anyway. The
Human Rights Campaign and progressive groups went all out against Dan Lipinski, the conservative Democrat, anti-gay and anti-choice in Illinois, but he squeaked out a victory over Maureen Newman, and also in Illinois, Erica Harold?
Yes.
Yes, the former Miss America, who was exposed as having an anti-gay past that she apologized for, got 59% of the vote, so she will be running as the AG, for AG. And she faces a Democrat named Kwame Raoul, a state senator. He only got 30% of the Democratic vote, but he prevailed.
And the Republican candidate for governor, the woman who ran the transphobic ads, she lost the primary for governor. No, yes, exactly.
Yeah. In Groves, Texas, an out city council member named Cross Coburn, 19 years old, is hitting back against the fact that Grindr photos of him were sent to City Hall and press outlets. Now, he calls it harassment. The mayor, Brad Bailey, said, this is unbecoming of a public officer. What, wanting to have sex? But he said there was nothing illegal about it. But the townspeople who were interviewed said, "Oh, I don't like this."
Well, in another small town in Texas, the local newspaper is run by a publisher with a strong religious bent, and he, in publishing an obit of a woman, took out the mention of her son's husband, even though they'd been together for many years, and the mother was perfectly accepting of the couple, and the publisher said, a man can't have a husband.
Right, just it's impossible.
Oh, yes. And also in Texas, there has been a settlement by the state with Lambda Legal Defense over the state's policies on how they treat LGBT prison inmates. They're working out new policies there.
By the way, the March for Our Lives is this Saturday, but there was the walkout on the 14th, and we learned this from Arkansas. Students who walked out of their school in Greenbrier were penalized. They had an option of a 2-day suspension or paddling.
Paddling?
The students chose corporal punishment. These kids are serious.
They are tough.
Go ahead. Beat us up for this.
Wow. By the way, in Utah on Saturday, they're having a March for Our Lives in Salt Lake, but some of the schools in Utah, instead of talking about this and the issue of school safety for kids, are putting up posters about a race to reduce bullying, which is, according to one of our viewers, an attempt to change the subject.
Melania Trump's cause.
Yeah.
In Brooklyn, a guy named Clifford Williams, 60 years old, he met a 21-year-old guy outside of Popeyes in the wee hours last Wednesday. They went back to the older man's apartment in Bed-Stuy, and when he was flirting with the guy, the younger man conked him on the head with a low-weight dumbbell and killed him.
Wow. Well, back to Texas, the Austin bomber.
Yes.
He's against same-sex marriage.
He is, and he's against abortion.
I guess we shouldn't say is, because he's gone now.
He exploded, yes, but he made a lot of right-wing things. I mean, I wouldn't even say they were the most extreme, crazy things. They were just.
He's against putting sex offenders on lifetime registries.
Right, but he's gone,
Yeah.
and he certainly was tied in with the right.
In Miami, the Miami Herald printed a half a full page obit for a trans student, Eric Peter Beck, who was transitioning to become Hope. He wrote a long explanation about to his mother, apologizing. She had been supportive. The school had been supportive of his transition. Everyone, doctors, everyone had been supportive. And yet, at 17, he took his own life. And it's a huge deal in Miami.
Have we talked about the fact that the NFL star Aaron Hernandez, who was, convicted
killer?
of, yes, that he was, that there's a new special out talking about people who knew him who said that he was gay. And this
There
was
have
what
been
he was.
rumors all along, and that he'd had
a relationship with a man at the University of Florida, also
and in
before
prison.
that, and just, but he killed himself in prison. Well, that was in 2017.
Look, I am reading Fire and Fury now, and Michael Wolff's book about Trump, and he mentions, and I couldn't remember whether I'd heard this before, that Trump's older brother Fred, who died of alcoholism, was gay.
No.
No evidence to that, just a mention of a rumor, so I don't know whether that's true. In Columbus, Ohio, last summer at the Black Pride parade and festival, several people sat down and stopped it. They were demonstrating in support of Philando Castile, who was killed by the cop, and the cop was acquitted. That was the one where the guy was in the car and his girlfriend was
awful.
Taking the pictures of him being shot.
No penalty.
Yeah, so, no, totally acquitted. So 4 people stopped the Black Pride parade to protest this, and they were arrested. And they have now been convicted and sentenced to fines, community service, and lengthy probation. They stopped the parade for all of 7 minutes. The protesters were all black, a couple of them trans, and I just don't see prosecuting people who do something like that.
Well, I do have to say, in the spirit of civil disobedience, part of the power of that and the civil rights movement was people were jailed, they took penalties, and our consciences were pricked by that.
Or they got paddled at school.
Yes, well, exactly, by accepting the penalty. I
just think it's a shame that the powers that be can't understand the necessity of protest.
Okay. Well,
in Framingham, Mass, good news, the Framingham School Council, by a vote of 9-0, voted that students can participate in sports in their lived gender. But if you're non-binary, you have to pick a side.
Oh.
There's no non-binary team. You have to play.
Can't we all get along? No. The war between the states continues. Tennessee is now barring state funds for lawmakers attending the National Conference of State Legislators because they're meeting in San Diego, which is a state that boycotts boycotts Tennessee.
That's tricky. In St. Louis, Missouri, the parents of a trans woman have donated their house to the Metro Trans Umbrella Group. That was just a nice thing to do.
In California, as we told you was going to happen, but Toni Atkins has become the first woman and the first lesbian to be the California Senate leader. Mm-hmm. She's a former Assembly Speaker, And she presides over a Senate that has lost its Democratic supermajority.
But still has a vast majority.
Yes.
And also in California, Kate Kendall, executive director of the National Center for Lesbian Rights for 22 years, a fundamentally important legal group. We hear a lot about Lambda Legal or about the ACLU's LGBT project.
Or gay and lesbian advocates and defenders.
Yes, but NCLR doesn't get the attention it deserves. They've been so important on discrimination cases, marriage cases, conversion therapy, and Kate Kendall is you've seen Kate Kendall on this show several times, a great dynamic leader, originally a Mormon from Utah, and she has announced that she is stepping down as executive director at the end of this year, so she has a ways to go. I asked her if she was going to be working on her golf game, and she said, "I'm not retiring. I'm just looking for my next
You can play golf and not be retired.
project."
I have a friend who does that.
Yeah.
At the Society for Reproductive Investigation, they've identified genetic variants in 20 genes that may play a role in transgender identity. And but the point of what they're saying is that the researcher said, look, it's not a choice, it's a way of being.
Wait, is this the Brazil study?
No, that's another one.
Okay, we'll get to that.
Okay.
And do we care that someone on Twitter says Donnie McClurkin sexually abused him 20 years ago at an Exodus International Conversion Therapy?
That story has been out there for a long time about Donnie. It doesn't surprise me.
All right, we're actually running out of time, so let's hip-hop through international news.
Well, in the United Kingdom, they do the BBC covers Wimbledon, and Martina Navratilova, because they have to publish salaries of the high earners, found out that John McEnroe, who's a commentator, who does on airtime more, made 10 times what she's making, and she said, effing hell, come on. And the BBC shot back that he's the best expert commentator in the sport, and the gender is not a factor.
Well, I understand differentials in pay by how much work you do and your competence and whatever, but 10 times more seems egregious.
Right.
All right, so we are mourning the death of Marielle Franco, the assassination of Marielle Franco in Brazil. Meanwhile, a little piece of good news from Brazil, where a court has ordered that trans people can change their gender on their IDs without having to give proof of surgery or get court approval. They can do it more easily.
And good news from Australia, where in the state of Tasmania, Alison Standen, we have a picture of her, is the first out lesbian in the state parliament in Tasmania.
There was a gay man 35 years ago, but Alison is the first out lesbian. Also in Australia, adoption by same-sex couples is now legal everywhere in the country.
In Peru, get this, the Pontifical Catholic College is now allowing trans students to use the name that corresponds to their gender identity. Don't let the Holy Father hear about that.
And in Sweden, reparations for trans people who were forcibly sterilized between 1972 and 2013.
Shocking.
Very common in Europe, not here, to say if you want to transition, you must be forcibly sterilized. They're now calling it a severe human rights violation, and they will pay an estimated 600 to 700 trans people who were subjected to this.
In Northern Ireland, the holdout on same-sex marriage in the United Kingdom, the same-sex marriage case was heard by a panel of 3 appeals judges this week, and a decision is expected soon. People want the right to be married throughout the United Kingdom.
And speaking of throughout the United Kingdom, they've been having their annual Commonwealth countries meeting. They managed to do it without discussing the fact that the majority of those countries still criminalize LGBT people.
But Prince William spoke out for LGBT rights.
He did.
At a reception for Commonwealth Day. That's highly unusual for a royal.
And he claims that as he travels the world to these countries, he pushes LGBT rights in those countries.
You want to be king? Better watch it.
In Turkey, 2 trans women were killed in the month of March, and one more was attacked. Not very safe in Turkey.
In New Zealand, activists want compensation from the government for men convicted under the anti-sodomy laws before the reform in 1986, as Germany and Canada have done. The government is not considering it. They say the harm is hard to quantify.
Dust up in Toronto, Canada, where a trans woman who went missing last July and whose body was found a month later, but who was not identified at the time and not really declared missing, has finally been identified as 27-year-old Allura Wells. But people are very angry at the cops and LGBT organizations for not pursuing this better.
And in Germany, the state of Bavaria, which is the big Catholic one, is dropping its legal challenge to the same-sex marriage law from last year. They say, if the Catholic Church is changing around this in Germany, which they are, maybe we can too.
And in Chile, the Comptroller General says that even though a new, more conservative president has been elected who's not in favor of same-sex marriage, the country has committed to same-sex marriage legalization, particularly around the ruling by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights, and they must legalize same-sex marriage and attendant rights and benefits. And that's also a question in Costa Rica, which is also expected to move ahead with legalization, but the sort of crazy Christian right-winger is ahead in the polls in the upcoming presidential election there.
All right, AIDS news.
Yes.
What do we think of the new leader of the CDC that's being looked at?
Bad.
Okay.
We don't like him. Dr. Robert Redfield. Well, I should be fairer than that. The AIDS community, so to speak, is kind of split. Robert Redfield comes from the University of Maryland. He's being appointed the new head of the Centers for Disease Control. He's touted as an HIV and AIDS expert, having worked on it for many years, and as an addiction expert, but he actually has very far right-wing affiliations, like the World Congress of Families, which has gone around the world working against us. He's very tightly tied to them, and that's where his nomination comes from. This is, again, the right-wing evangelicals going to the Trump administration and saying, put this person in this job.
Not science.
So Dr. Redfield has historically been in favor of mandatory testing, and
at a time it was not a good idea.
Names reporting. It's one thing to recommend routine testing of everyone. That's a good thing, but he was one of these punitive, get the names. He supported abstinence-only education, no federal funds around the world for prostitutes for treatment or prevention. Let's see, pro-criminalization of people with HIV.
But he's not in yet, so.
No, but there are some in the AIDS community who support him. He's anti-gay, he's anti-condoms. I mean, that's his whole history. Some of it he's renounced, but watch out.
Hey, the Chelsea Sexual Health Clinic has reopened after 3 years. There was a van out there to do tests. It's a spanking new facility. It's over there on 9th Avenue around 28th Street. It was an historic place to go, and it looks like a much better place to go.
Here's a question. This Brazil study, which I mentioned before, it's a small study. They studied 20 cisgender men, 20 cisgender women, 20 trans women not on hormones, and 20 trans women on hormones, and they looked at their brains. And what they found was that all the trans women, on hormones or not, seemed to have some difference in their brain from birth, thereby supporting a theory that
it's only natural.
Yeah, exactly.
That's the point.
Yeah.
All right. In California, Governor Brown has signed the bill making knowing transmission of HIV a misdemeanor instead of a felony, bringing it in line with other diseases.
And let's remember, this is about knowing deliberate transmission, not about people with HIV having sex, which does get criminalized.
Yeah.
In the UK, there is a company called Pink Parcel that sells sort of packages of products for menstruation issues, tampons, but pain relief, all sorts of stuff. So one of their new ads features a trans man, because trans men who have not gone past a certain point in transitioning are still menstruating, and that is not frequently recognized by the medical profession or the world at large. So this guy, Kenny Jones, 23 years old, is now one of the faces of Pink Parcel. I thought that was quite remarkable.
In Milwaukee, they discovered a cluster of 125 people, including high school students who have tested positive for HIV, syphilis, or both. One of the largest STI clusters they've ever seen in the city. And this is on the heels of the abstinence-only thing from Governor Walker out there. But the AIDS groups are all trying to pitch in and try to get this under control.
The annual, or however often, conference on retroviruses and opportunistic infections just took place in Boston. A couple of the headlines: deaths are plunging in San Francisco because they're really getting people on treatment very quickly, like within 6 days of diagnosis. And that has the death rate really going down for people with HIV. But the other headline out of this conference is that young Latino men who have sex with men are a particular cohort with higher current infection rates and need targeted prevention and treatment.
Well, if we talk about nothing else, we have to talk about Will and Grace.
Well, first, Australia will subsidize PrEP starting April 1st. Yes, let's talk about Will and Grace.
Okay.
So they did an episode last week that they thought was just hilarious, and I'm sure they did it out of a good-hearted desire to explicate this question of cake baking and same-sex weddings and everything, but they totally got it wrong.
Right. A guy comes in and he wants a cake to make America great again and praise Trump and written all over the cake. And the baker says, I can't do that. I don't want to touch anything like that. And then Grace comes in and says, wait a minute. If it has to be, if you have to sell wedding cakes, you have to do this too, and that confuses the issue. We are not saying people have to write any kind of a message. By the end of this episode, a guy was coming in wanting a swastika on the cake, and that was supposed to be okay too. No, it's not. It is a difference.
We have said here, the law says that you can refuse to put out a particular message, meaning a written message. Printers have this too.
I don't want to print pornography. You don't have to.
You do not have to. But selling a cake to a same-sex couple who are getting married is an entirely different thing, is before the Supreme Court now. And Will and Grace has just absolutely screwed this up and sent absolutely the wrong message. And the community should be up in arms about this. But instead, I've heard people say, oh, wasn't that great? No!
Actually, it was Karen that wanted the Make America Great cake. It was a guy who came in with the swastika. But they need a legal consultant for this thing. They've spread a lot of misinformation about this very critical issue to the whole civil rights community.
Terrible. But alternatively, on Madam Secretary, the CBS show, Sarah Ramirez's character Kat has come out as bisexual.
And they did
with
a whole Chechnya persecution thing. They named the country something else. But,
and she's certainly gender queer on the show, and all of that is a good message. The new movie Love, Simon has come out. Oh, I see. We have almost run out of time.
We'll put Chris Cooper's review up.
I'm suspicious. It's a little gay teen romance. Haven't they seen Glee? Do we really need this right now?
Actor Corey Michael Smith came out. And Ann was at Angels in America with Holland Taylor and Sarah Paulson.
Yes, can we put that picture up? We have a few seconds.
Holland Taylor and Sarah Paulson at Angels in America.
Come on.
Come on.
Yeah.
There you are.
I was so thrilled to run into them.
They're a great couple, loving couple.
They were so affectionate throughout the play. We sat 2 rows behind them. It was great to see them. Thank you for letting me take that picture.
Okay.
And Gay USA will be back next week. Thank you for watching.